I feel like we've all been living so deep in that dread that I feel like the moment that Coach Walz said that thing about, yeah, these guys are scary. Yeah, they would destroy the country, but they're also just weird. It was like he responded to horror with this kind of just simple hope.
Hi, I'm Ana Marie Cox, and this is 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. It is 62 days until the election. This show is about having smart conversations with smart people who may give us insight into this historic and wild time in American history. And I wanted to talk to John Moe, my friend John Moe, about what's going on, mainly because I am interested to know how we might survive it. And I mean that both politically and personally. Also, he is the host of Depression Mode and Sleeping with Celebrities, which is not what it sounds like, and the author of The Hilarious World of Depression. He is my friend, as I said, and also a longtime Minnesotan, which I think we will cover at least a little bit. Because you said you are not a policy expert regarding Minnesota's wonderful social safety net. And here is where I beg to differ, rather I can explain it, because you don't have to be an expert on social safety net if you live in Minnesota, because it's there.
Yeah, it's certainly ingrained in the culture, more than I think a lot of other places. I've only lived here and in Washington State, but it's just taken as a thing that we understand as being important. I mean, I remember a few years ago now being at Burrito Mercado, El Burrito Mercado, Mexican food place over on the west side, and a friend of mine came running up to me and said, "John, we're going to do all these amazing things for mental health with the new administration." It was Peggy Flanagan, who's the lieutenant governor, who was really excited to tell me about the various plans that she had for the administration of herself and Tim Walz. And I thought that sounded great. Again, like I don't have a knowledge of what the legislature has passed. I know they've been passing all sorts of things, but I was just charmed by the fact that I could be approached by the lieutenant governor while waiting for my burrito to get the lowdown on things that were happening.
I think we can just take a second on Peggy Flanagan coming up to you at the burrito place and being like, "And this is what we're going to do."
It's funny, ever since he got the nomination, and I don't know him. I've met him once briefly at the state fair, actually, because that's where you meet people. And but I've noticed that the whole state is crawling with Tim Walz's. It's like this archetype, in the same way that you might see bleach blonde, skinny actresses in Hollywood. You see Tim Walz. I was out to dinner with my family at a restaurant, sitting on the patio out there, and just on the patio we counted at least 6 Tim Walz doppelgangers. So he's an archetype. He's all over the place.
He's an archetype also in his politics, which, as you said, I did not appreciate until I left, just how ingrained into the culture it is to just help people, like to just have policies that extend care to folks. Like it's sort of like Europe, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, of course you do this. Like, that's not a political issue. That's just how you help folks. That's not a left-right thing.
I think it has its roots in not dying in the winter, because I think that you have to. I mean, if like I've lived here, like I said, 16 and a half years, which has meant several winters. And if there's somebody on your street spinning out or trying to get their car out of the snowbank so they can get to work, you go out and you help them.
And it is just that regular folks thing. And also, besides a sort of democratic socialist, I think there's a thread of kind of kind libertarianism, right? Which is again expressed by Tim Walz, which is like, we're going to help you out, move your car, raise your barn, extend social policies so your kids get a good education and aren't hungry. And if you need help for mental health or for addiction purposes, like it's there. But also,
Yeah.
you know what? Like, do your thing. Like,
Yeah.
we're not going to
Mind your own business.
we're not going to bug you
Yeah.
about this stuff. And I think this really matters. I think the sort of Minnesota attitude towards social policy, this idea that it should be broad and that it's not a political issue, is incredibly important to know about, because I think Tim Walz might be the first vice presidential pick to be selected in part because of their policy background.
Mm-hmm.
Like that this was an endorsement by Kamala Harris of the policy background that he comes from.
Well, and the very active policy moves on the part of the Walz administration when they got a very narrow majority, like a 1-vote majority in the legislature. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was really a dam burst of like, okay, we're going to change the way we've been doing things. We're going to make some real substantive changes. And, maybe that's something that a potential Harris administration is looking for, of like, instead of talking about why we can't do certain things, let's just be bold and make some big sweeping changes. And maybe that's what they saw in what Walz was doing.
I think having Tim Walz on board and seeing what he did with that slim majority and becoming a more popular governor after he did it, right? Doing these things that are painted as radical by the far right and that Democrats have kind of acceded to that idea in some cases. Like, oh, I don't know, universal school lunch, maybe that is kind of a radical idea. Maybe that isn't something we should push for. But then the Walz administration comes in with Peggy Flanagan. Very important point. She is a superstar and a real force for social justice. I think she pulled him towards that. I mean, he's his own guy and everything, but she's always been agitating on that side of things to do these things like universal school lunch, to do these things like around gun control, to do these things like making Minnesota a haven for abortion seekers and for trans people. And those things turn out to be really popular.
Yeah. Well,
Like, that you're not
this,
actually risking that much. I think Democrats have always been like, we can't, it's controversial and we don't really have the political power. But if you just go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like Obama said at the convention. He said, now that it's popular, nobody calls it Obamacare anymore. Now it's just healthcare. You know the story of how Walz and Flanagan know each other, right?
No.
Oh, okay. So 2002, Paul Wellstone dies in a plane crash. And one of the things that came out of that event and that loss was that the Wellstone community, foundation, family decides to start training politicians, people interested in activism, people interested in maybe running for office one day, on how to do that. One of the, I guess, instructors, counselors, leaders of that movement was a very, very young Peggy Flanagan. And one of the first students she tutored was a younger Tim Walz. And so she kind of brought him into the system. And then in 2006, he ends up running for Congress down in Mankato and gets elected. So they go way back as, but it was a pupil to student relationship originally.
I think it's really cool to think of Tim Walz as not just a great teacher, but also a great student, like most great teachers are.
Yeah. Well, that's what he says. People say, well, why does he look so much older than Harris? And he said, I was a lunchroom monitor for 20 years. You don't come out of that with a full head of hair.
And also you don't come out of that without having learned things yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't be a good teacher without being willing to learn. Let's shift a little bit to just straight politics, or considering politics, electoral politics.
Okay. All right.
You and I have been friends for a long time, but one of the ways we came to be closer friends was that during the pandemic, we did a series of kind of live streams where we checked in. It was
Yep.
just people could watch us checking in on each other,
Yep.
which it was a simpler time. Or was a time when that was needed, was just to normalize, like, talking really frankly about mental
Mm-hmm.
health. And it helped me so much just to get through the pandemic.
Oh,
And
good.
I think you and I, to my mind, were some of the earliest people to talk about that experience and the Trump years and January 6th
Mm-hmm.
as being mental health trauma
Yeah.
for everyone.
Yeah. It was a lot. It was very intense, and it hasn't stopped. I think. I've been looking into this a little bit, just knowing that we're going to be talking today, and while it's not a recognized term by the psychological establishment. It's not in the DSM-5. Election stress disorder is a term that I've got a lot of hits for when I search on it. And people are. It's happened. This is the third time it's happened. In 2016, the American Psychological Association says 52% of American adults reported the election to be a very, very or somewhat significant source of stress, equally among Democrats and Republicans, men and women. 2024, that number's up to 73%. So it's a big jump even from there. And it's this stress that is kind of all encompassing, because it's not just I'm nervous, but it's spiking epinephrine and cortisol, the stress hormones, and that is having physical manifestations. That's leading to all sorts of increase of heart attack or stroke, just all these different factors. So it's become this not just a political issue, but a public health issue, and certainly a public mental health issue, but physical health as well. And mental health and physical health are both just part of health.
And I think the recognition that this is a national trauma, collective trauma, which I've written about myself. I did a cover story last year for the New Republic about this. It's something that that in the scientific community, it's a little bit like, well, we don't really know, like, if that's a thing. But there are studies that have been done, for instance, about various like at-risk populations, including poor people, Black people, disabled people, LGBTQ plus people, who, when the culture is discussing their rights, when the idea of racial equity is under attack, those people, it's not only that they're survivors or been exposed to more hate crime, which is a verifiable trend, but that they suffer health issues disproportionately, like heart attacks, obesity, depression, anxiety show up at greater rates in that population when there is a controversy surrounding basically their reason for existence. I mean, this is shown among trans people and trans kids all the time, right?
Yeah, and that's what it's important to recognize the difference between an irrational fear, or a paranoia, or some sort of cognitive distortion, and actual existential threats. That this isn't an irrational response. This jump in cortisol, this jump in these, a fight or flight or freeze instinct is coming from a very rational place. And so in that sense, it's beneficial look at it as a mental health issue, but also to look at it as what is the physical manifestation of what's happening here and who is it impacting the most.
And then we get to electoral politics, because what happens when the party that we have fought to elect or been having this debate over their election is the one that will refuse to give those things, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just, it's double trauma, right? It's trauma upon trauma. If we have this election where all these things are contested and then Republicans are put in power, and not only does it remain a controversial issue, but policies that could help those people are not enacted. And to be clear, I think that it's sometimes not helpful to talk about what policies will specifically be enacted by an administration, because that depends on the legislature. There is the Green Lantern theory of the presidency, where they can just, turn up and like policy will follow.
Yeah.
Is not a good explanation of how politics works. It's not maybe helpful again about how politics work. But I think we look at Harris's record in the Senate, which was very attuned on social justice and on social safety net. And then you look at Tim Walz again. Like, Tim Walz is one of the first presidential pick that I can think of is based his selection is based on policy. So what are the tools that people can have to deal with the trauma that they might be experiencing? Like, also, wait, hold on. Harrison Walz being the ticket relieved a lot of stress right there. However, I don't think we can discount the amount of anxiety and stress that continued despite a sense of optimism.
Yeah. No, I think that, to me, I mean, the experts say, and experts because they write it down somewhere and it appears on the internet, the one thing I keep hearing is the best way to handle this is to do something about it, is to work on the campaign that you believe in. And this goes across the board. Like, if you have sort of pinned yourself to a candidate or movement, and the other person is a threat to the type of America you think that it is absolutely necessary, or we're all going to die, that can go both sides. But the thing that is recommended is, you go down and you stuff envelopes, you go down and you write postcards, and you go door to door, and you become active. I think that is, to me, okay, I'll say that, and then the other thing I keep hearing is meditation, and trying to make still a lot of the churn that you're experiencing, and kind of come back into yourself, so that you are not diffused through a million 538 predictions and polls that go up and down, and your life is in the hands of the Nate Silvers of the world. And so both of those make a lot of sense to me. I think, to me, it comes down to an issue of despair. And this is something that, I've been very open. I've dealt with major depressive disorder a lot in my life. And I sometimes think of it as like, we're all walking around the edge of this pool, this giant reservoir, and we're all just sort of walking carefully along the edge, trying not to fall in, and doing what we can to take steps away from that edge, because if you fall in, that's the despair, and that's when you lose hope, when you stop fighting, and when you um, when you're giving up, and you know that nothing is going to ever improve. To me, that is my vision of hell. Um, yeah, the thing that's always scared me the most, and I'm not a big believer in hell with Satan and a pitchfork, but the idea of being in torment and it never stopping, like the eternal part of it, was scarier to me than the torment part of it. And I think that's what we're all trying to do here, is not to fall into despair, not to fall into hell as we walk carefully along the edge of that reservoir. I think it's all a despair issue.
I agree. I think I disagree with something else you said. I think it's the Minnesotan in you who said it doesn't really matter which vision of America you work towards, that the important thing is working towards, that vision, like that keeps you from despair. So,
Oh no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I think both sides feel this existential threat.
right. Okay.
That
This
the
is
other
where I'm going to,
your show.
so you, I think, correctly describe both sides. And again, it's the both sides that I'm kind of like, I don't know, like if
It's a nervous making term, isn't it? Both sides.
yes, experience this threat of like, oh, in America that I just, very to my
The
core,
end of America as
end
we
of
know it.
America, as we know it. And that is a piece of rhetoric that gets thrown around there, I will say, by both sides. But I refuse to believe that doing get out the vote, grassroots politics on the side of a hate group is something that's going to improve your mental health. Like, I don't think so. I don't think so, John. I think that
Okay.
like what a tremendously overly fair Minnesotan concept to be like.
Well,
You have people that join Daily Stormer,
yeah.
they're at least part of something.
I think the idea of having some agency in your future is something that a lot of people crave. I
Right.
think that being a spectator can cause great feelings of distress.
Sure. And I agree that people who join far right-wing movements are often acting out of a desire for community, a desire to rid themselves of despair.
Yeah.
But I also believe to my core that ultimately the structure and the beliefs of those kinds of movements
Yes.
will eventually make things worse for the people that are involved. Like, there may be a temporary sense of belonging,
Mhm.
right? But ultimately, fascist movements and far right-wing movements depend on the vision of never-ending despair and depend on the oppression of others. And I believe the oppression of others taints your own soul.
I am also against the oppression of others. And,
right. So
wanna make
I just
that
want to be
clear.
super careful of
Yeah.
saying like, well, if you believe that abortion is murder and that it's a genocide if abortion becomes legal, you just get
Yeah.
out there and knock on doors.
Well,
Like,
but I mean,
and that'll improve your mental health. I mean, I guess it will. But I think
I would say that that what people are saying when I read about what do you do about election stress disorder, what keeps coming up is take agency, do something about it
Sure.
yourself. And it shouldn't be to oppress others. It shouldn't be to hurt anybody. It shouldn't be to crush dissent or or anything like that. But I think it's educating oneself and kind of narrowing down what you think for something that is what you can do for the betterment of people, not to crush
right.
them.
But here's the pushback. I think that what you're saying does rely. You sort of made fun of the idea of experts and the idea that like there are people who have written this down, right?
There are
And I
people with
think
more degrees than I have writing it down, but yes.
right, but I think that the structure of the education of psychiatrists and psychologists tends to be a framework where, well, all extreme beliefs are equal, all political beliefs are equal, all beliefs about the self are equal, like any kind of limiting, any kind of sense of despair is just, and I agree that despair as an emotion does not have a political valence. I agree. However, I think
Always wait for the however.
the treatment of despair does have what some people would consider a political valence, what I would consider just human. But that I think ultimately you cannot be a part of you cannot dig yourself out of despair by being part of a community that oppresses others.
Right. Yeah. Well, you can't build a better community by hating people and knocking them down and
Yeah.
and crushing them.
Yeah.
That's not building a better world. I think the idea of and maybe it's an old fashioned Reagan Tip O'Neill kind of sentiment, but the idea that if there are people who want a fair and equitable, peaceful, verdant world and have different methods of how to get there, I think that's a legitimate argument. The idea that, some people, and this is what's so distressing about some political rhetoric that I've been seeing is like, the problem is women who won't have children, like they're the enemy. The problem is people coming from other countries who don't speak English. I'm the son of immigrants. Like when you get into these are the people we should hate in order to achieve a better world, I think that's a completely different kettle of fish.
Yeah. And also the idea, again, like on a very small scale, I kind of see, again, I think that people who join far right wing movements, or even who join just like who don't think of them as far right wing movements, who think of them as just like America first, right?
Yeah.
I don't particularly have a problem with people of color, but whatever. I do think that can be a temporary solution to despair and depression because you are working with people, you are feeling
You get a
like
sense
you have
of
some
belonging.
agency.
You're invited to a lunch table, and
Sure.
you have
But
somewhere
what
to
I
go.
think happens in those movements, and that what is unsustainable, is actually something we're seeing happening on the right and in the Republican Party, which is eventually, the leopard eating face party starts to eat your face, right? So
Yeah.
you get things like pro-life, so-called pro-life Republicans being like, "Oh, wait, in vitro fertilization? Wait, you're also going after that?" Like it becomes like, oh, this is something that's going to affect me now. And like we've talked on the show about voter suppression, which, a lot of white people support things in theory like voter ID, like closing registration, like closing polling places. And then those things start to affect like middle-class white people, right? So that's kind of why I believe it's not sustainable. I think that if you join a movement based on hierarchy, you eventually are going to be you're going to realize you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, right? Like unless you're a very specific kind of person, like the richest, the most racially pure, because racial purity, that standard is always slipping, in a
Yeah.
way to support whatever kind of capitalist hegemony exists. So I don't know. I mean, like you weren't saying that. I mean, I know that you're anti-joining hate groups.
I'm very nervous about this episode going out into the world now. Yeah, no.
I want to be very clear. Where I was resisting was kind of like not what you said, but what I think of experts saying.
Yeah.
This idea that like there is something neutral to grassroots activism as a balm.
There's nothing neutral about the idea of some people not being America and other people being America.
Yeah.
That's anti-American to me.
I actually had a really good discussion. I think it was with Max Boot, one of the best names in journalism. And like,
Yes.
whatever, I think he might be controversial, but his journey from being a never Trumper to just kind of being he's a progressive to being like an anti-racist
Mhm.
was, I thought I was arguing in favor of marginal tax rates, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I thought I was arguing about economics. And
Yeah.
really, like, the thing that even though I was arguing about economics, that's the tip of an iceberg of a structure that ultimately is about racism and oppression and whiteness,
Well, I find
right?
it very confusing right now to figure out, like the divide is less about political philosophy and more about whether you want to follow this guy Trump,
Yeah.
you know, to the point where like, okay, the Republicans are against IVF. Now because this guy said this thing, now the government will pay for your IVF treatment somehow, incredibly expensive procedure. And the left favors uh, normalization of marijuana usage and legalization, and now this guy does too. And it's it's hard to keep the debate being about policy when the policy is going in a way where Mike Pence is going on TV saying this isn't conservatism. I can't endorse this because I'm a conservative and this is not what that's about.
Well, the through line here is that it's not about policy, it's about it's a cult. And the other thing is that when it comes to policy, that's not what Trump is about.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
what people have figured out is, something like Project 2025, which is that Trump can say whatever the fuck he wants. Like he just wants to get elected. It's so it's not even transactional. It's just fake. It's just a guy who wants to get elected just going to say what he needs to say. And then there's all these people that's like, yes, have him say whatever he needs to say
Mm.
because we're behind the scenes and we know that he will okay whatever we want him to do. Like I've been hearing on the right a lot of talk about he said he's basically, pro killing babies under 6 weeks. And yeah, well, whatever, gonna vote for him anyway because like we need this guy elected because he's the way that we see our other he's the avenue through which our policies can be expressed, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just a willingness to be like, yeah, whatever, yeah, say whatever you need to get elected. Which, if a person on the Democratic Party said, I think 6 weeks is too short a time for to be able to get reproductive health care, they'd be like, baby killer, like at the top of their lungs.
Here's what I know. I don't know. I gave up on being somebody who you should listen to about politics a while ago. But I will talk about the mental health of it, which is that moving definition and that sort of blurring between following a figure versus following a philosophy, and that kind of the tumult of that is incredibly mentally taxing. And I think that's the wall so many people are hitting right now, where your brain tries to keep up with the tactics and techniques. It tries to keep up with the ramifications of what this means if this person wins or the other person wins, and it makes it hard to get food on the table for your kids. It makes it hard to get out of bed and go to work. And I think that's the fatigue that is has been thrust upon us to deal with in a way that we can't, in a similar way to the way the American mental health care system is set up, the way the American healthcare system is set up, where it is almost a full-time job to try to navigate it to get the help that you need. And that effort, that unpaid labor, falls on the people least equipped to handle that effort, which is people with mental health issues. So I think that's what sends people hurtling into the reservoir of like, you have no choice but to have to deal with these incredibly difficult, confusing issues. Yet in attempting to do that, you're really not up to the task because they're larger than you think. And I think that's what leads some people to, despite the enormous stakes of an election like this, to check out or to take the stand of, well, they're all the same, no matter what happens, it'll all be the same, because it's just so much to handle mentally. It's more than we are equipped to handle mentally.
Okay, I don't want to end on that note.
Okay.
So what I will say is repeating the best tool to use in staying out of the reservoir of despair is to take action. And I do believe the most sustainable way to take action is to do it in a way that is deeply embedded in your community and based on connection, enduring connection.
Yeah.
And not based on the vision of a single person.
I would submit that the course of action that makes the most sense to me is to establish yourself as a person, and a person who can, yes, go out and get involved if that's the way that you think best handles that, or pursue meditation, pursue that EMDR treatment that you've been putting off for so long. Something that reminds you that you have a voice, that you have a sense of being able to actualize yourself and affect yourself and those around you, that you have some autonomy and you're not just, a leaf in the river being hurtled out to sea, that you're a boat.
Like that better than the other way of ending the show. We are going to end the show. I am Ana Marie Cox. This is 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. We have just 62 days until the election. I believe you can do it, listener, viewer. You should listen to John Moe's show as a way of getting through it. It's called Depression Mode. The other show is called Sleeping with Celebrities, but it's not what it sounds like. It is celebrities talking about boring things to help lull you to sleep. You've had, I know, John Hodgman. You had our very handsome friend, Rhett Miller, cannot be mentioned without stating that he's a handsome and sexy man.
Yes.
Who else have you had on?
We've had Josh Gondelman, who I know has been on your show recently. Todd Barry has been on. My wife, Jill Moe, talking all about crop art at the Minnesota State Fair because she's a luminary in the world of things, of that particular world. David Plotz from the Slate Political Gabfest, all sorts of folks.
Okay. And you have written The Hilarious World of Depression, which is a wonderful book. If you are listening to this episode, you should know that it also exists as a YouTube show, and you should like and subscribe and comment and review. And if you are watching this on YouTube, well, then you should know it's also available as a podcast. And we'll be back tomorrow, counting down the days again. There'll be one less than 62, which I believe is 61. With that, thank you so much, John Moe.
Thanks.
For security reasons, the governor's visit was largely contained to the dairy building. He and First Lady Gwen Walz helped serve ice cream and milkshakes.
For those not from Minnesota, just to be clear, there's a lot of great state fairs in the country. This is the best one.